My name is Britt Royer. I am the curator here at St. Mary's College Museum of Art. And today we are delighted to start off Women's History Month with a screening of 100 Years from Mississippi. I am here with my colleague Sharon, who will be introducing our program here today. But before I hand things over to her, I wanted to share a little background about our exhibitions and the programs that we have here at the museum. Our current exhibitions are Jacob Lawrence, 3 series of prints, which is right here in this front gallery and the following gallery spaces. This is a traveling exhibit that we were fortunate to have here on display through May 14th. So please take an opportunity to check it out and to experience the prints of Jacob Lawrence. In our back galleries, we have paintings by the Oakland-based painter Louis Segrest. This body of work pulls from our permanent collection and a few private collections. And this exhibition will be on view through June 18th. In alignment with Women's History Month, we're doing a lot of programs with Sharon. But then we also have some other exciting programs coming up as well. On March 23rd, we have a talk with Professor Claude, who will be examining the Toussaint L'Ouverture series right here in this exhibition space. And so please check out our calendar for all of the different fun things that we have. So without further ado, whatever that word is, I'm going to pass it on over to Sharon.
Okay, thank you, Britt. Hi, everybody. My name is Sharon Sabota. I'm the director of the Center for Women and Gender Equity. I meant to carry my cool program list of all of our wonderful events that are happening throughout this month. We have so many exciting things all month long. I'm going to highlight one other one that you can come back to this space for the welcome reception of. We'll have Angela Harrelson, the aunt of George Floyd, with us on March 14th. And we'll be here at 5:30 for a welcome reception, and then we'll actually be in the chapel for that. So now moving into this program, we are so lucky to have Tarabu Betserai Kirkland with us. He is a filmmaker and the director of 100 Years from Mississippi, which details the journey of his mother, who I wish I could have met. You'll get to learn about her in a minute. My favorite thing that I find myself quoting about her all the time are her secrets to longevity that I picked up in the film. She said she ate ice cream every day, she drank coffee every day, and she walked a lot and really believed in her community. And she also lived through some really tragic and difficult things. And Tarabu is a beautiful storyteller who will tell us a little bit about her journey through her. And also we'll share we'll have a question and answer session after this. The other thing I want to mention, today is the first day of Women's History Month, so can we note it? And I'm excited that we're starting off this year's program. We're starting off Women's History Month actually with a male identifying speaker, because we think that it's important for everybody of all gender identities to get together and really amplify and support each other and amplify women's voices as well as those across the gender spectrum. So we also really want to honor Tarabu for doing that. And Tarabu, would you like to say one or two words before we start the film?
Just thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the film and stick around to discuss them a little bit afterwards.
Okay, so I know the microphone can't pick up everything, but Tarabu says thank you all for coming, and there's going to be a question and answer session afterwards. So without further ado, 100 Years from Mississippi.
However, this film cost us about $200,000 to make. We got one very small grant of $5,000. The rest of the money we raised through crowdsourcing. And every one of those individuals gave $5, $10, $25, $100, and that was the only way we were able to make this film. So I have to honor the people who helped us get this thing done. So thank you for sitting through the credits.
Thank you. You had a question.
Yeah, so I know for us as students and as Black individuals, it's difficult to come to terms with this past in history. I was wondering how your experience of it was, since you were so closely related to it, you could see it through all of your past generations.
And before you answer, they asked me for amplification so that the microphone gets it. But the question is about, from the perspective of Black students, you're coming from that perspective with the question, and you're asking how is Tarabu as the director able to kind of cope with the stories that he's telling and the difficulty in that story.
Yeah, well, you know, the motivation for this story goes back to me being a kid and hearing it around a dinner table for years and years. And as a kid, you know, my first reaction upon hearing the story was really a question. I mean, how could anybody treat another human being like this? I couldn't digest that. But, you know, the more I began to learn and study, particularly about the legacy of slavery, I began to understand more deeply that the only way that you could treat another human being like that is if you did not see them as a human being. So this concept of shadow slavery that was rooted in the foundation of this country laid the foundation for that. So it was a very painful process, and the history is obviously devastating. But what was most relevant for me as I began to explore the story, particularly with my mother, and began to talk to her about going back to Mississippi after I realized I was going to make this film, her reaction, as you saw in the film, was always like, "Nah, I ain't going back there. Don't ask me. I don't want to hear about it." And it was generally funny when she said it, you know. But the more I began to get into the story, the more I realized how much trauma was involved in that response. And then it began to take on a greater significance for me, because then I realized she had been holding this for her entire life. Her father, for instance, after he was forced to leave Mississippi with a fear of being lynched, never spoke about it again for the rest of his life. And for me, it's like, I can't imagine holding on to that piece for that long. But that, for me, is why I have such respect for the vigilance in the Jewish community for keeping the story alive. Because that is an act of resistance in and of itself. It is the act of saying, we are going to remind the world of something that should never be repeated. And we're going to keep this story alive just so you know we have been through this and we should not revisit this again. So all of that stuff came up in the making of the film. And it keeps continuing to, I guess, refresh itself, particularly with all of the events of recent history. Even within the last month, we have just massive anti-history legislation going on in this country. We lobbied religiously Mississippi Public Television to get the program aired in Mississippi, and they consistently did not pick up the program. And it was disappointing, but it's, you know, you can't really, it's the Nelson Mandela piece, truth and reconciliation. You can't really have reconciliation until you have truth. So if you are committed to denying truth, you will never have reconciliation. So in response to your question, that the process was painful and continues to be painful, but the commitment is there to continue to tell these stories, which we must do.
Other questions? Thank you so much. There's a question.
So your mother would be totally justified in carrying an enormous amount of anger, and she denied feeling anger. Where do you think that came from for her?
She was always a deeply spiritual person, and the older she got, and she continued to get older and older and older, to the point where she's going to outlive us. At least for me personally, because I was extremely close to her, I began to realize how much spiritual capacity she had developed, which is really all of our tasks, right? I mean, irrespective of who we are on this planet, that is our responsibility to develop our spiritual capacity, our sense of forgiveness, our capacity to love, our compassion. And she did that. I mean, she did that. She embraced that as her challenge. And that's why I think the older she got, the more people wanted to be around her. It was like, how do you do that, you know? And she was very gracious with it, you know. She would sort of entertain like she was a guru or something, you know, like tapping people on the head and whatnot. But I think it's part of that, our own individual human evolution, to develop ourselves, to develop our heart, to develop our compassion. And that's one of the things that we wanted to show in the film. Not just the ugliness of this history, but how do you transcend that? Because, you know, we've heard about it enough. Now what do we do about it? And that's one of the things that she did. You know, she elevated herself so she could see it from a different place.
And as it's Women's History Month and we're looking at the intersectionality of issues, she was widowed young.
Yeah.
And in the first part of her life, she was a stay-at-home mother.
Yes.
And then she quickly became an Avon lady.
Yes.
Do you want to tell them a little bit about that journey of her becoming the primary breadwinner for you and your siblings?
It was a huge transition because my father was very old school. He didn't want his wife to work, so she took care of 9 kids. But then when he passed away, things changed, and we needed money, so she went to work. And she was very shy initially. She didn't want to get out there and, you know, knock on people's doors and sell stuff, you know. But the more she did it, I think the more she sort of understood that she had an ability to communicate with people. But people didn't want her to leave. They wanted to sit around and talk to her. And then I think she got what her true ministry was, of ministering to people. Avon was her ministry. She was ministering to people as she was going around to their homes and talking to them about their respective problems. And I think that's the part of her spiritual journey that went outside of her individual circle, outside of her family.
That's so powerful. Other questions? Yep, there's one.
I noticed that a lot of the newspapers were formatted and were written in ways to make it seem like those lynchings were unjustified, but yet they're still so prevalent. So even though the papers were written in a way that did not commend the whites for what they did,
Well,
I'll amplify the question.
Yeah.
So the question is about the newspapers with the headings and the coverage of the lynchings. She thinks that, Nancy thinks that it seemed like critical coverage, and she's kind of questioning how was that the case, and it still happened anyways.
Yeah, well, the one newspaper article that I discovered in 2015, which was really sort of like, in dramatic storytelling, there's this thing called the Inciting Incident. That's the event that propels the main character or characters on the journey that will last them through the entire narrative. That newspaper article was the Inciting Incident for me because it was really a front page advertisement. Hey, we're having a lynching tomorrow. Everybody come out. And they did it as if it was a picnic or a parade, because the city of Ellisville, where it occurred, was a small, sleepy town. They had 1,200 people in that city. Overnight, there were 10,000 people who showed up. 10,000 people. So they were capturing this process of this guy being chased throughout the backwoods of Mississippi for an entire week. Like, we're gonna get him, it's close. And then, obviously, there was no trial, there was no jury. They shot him and kept him alive overnight so that he could be lynched the next day publicly. So it definitely was not critical coverage. It was, they were the part of the posse to announce it to the public. This is what we're doing. This is what we're going to do. Come out and check us out
So
and watch it.
spectators rather than those who said anything.
Yes, yes. And through our investigation, we found that I reported his account of the event, which was really striking. Him narrating his story that he wrote for the press, because he was sent out to cover the lynching, and you could feel his revulsion to what was happening, to the point where he bought as many of the photographs as he could of the lynching and tore them up. It's just shocking stuff.
So that's the voice we're hearing when that's
Right,
the reporter.
the actor's
Okay.
voice.
Mhm. These are really good questions. Does anybody have another question before I throw one your way? Yep, there's two. We'll go in the back and then we'll have you, and I'll repeat the question because you're far away.
I can speak loudly so you don't have to amplify. My question is about a kind of response that you might get from young people, students, for example, who feel like they feel a certain guilt for something that is unpleasant for them. And I know that rationale is used by politicians to restrict what students' young minds are exposed to. And what would you say to a teacher who hears that I feel guilty about something that perhaps my grandparents were involved in, or great grandparents, just your thoughts.
So I'm still going to repeat it anymore because the microphone's way up here. So what would you say to a parent or to a teacher who says that they feel really guilty because perhaps their family or generations from their ancestors were involved in this and there's some guilt and shame around it and it makes it difficult to teach the topic?
What did you say to the student?
Oh, to the students.
I actually had a student last semester who asked this question and said, I feel a great deal of guilt. And then the speaker had some words of wisdom, and I just wanted yours.
Yeah. Again, it's devastating history. But I think one of the biggest challenges we have in this country is not confronting it. Because I think in not confronting it, it doesn't go away. So when I see, all of this anti-history legislation around the country, refusing to acknowledge any of the issues brought up in critical race theory, banning books, and I forget who said it. It was one politician said that, I think it might have been Greg Abbott in Texas, that by teaching this history to our children, they will grow up not loving their country. So my response is completely different. I think by teaching this history, young children will grow up acknowledging what happened and wanting to change what does history represent, wanting to get involved in doing something to change it. But by denying it, we are basically trying to erase our memory of history, what happened in this country. It's an erasure. It's not an acknowledgement. By acknowledging, we have the opportunity to confront it and then move on. But by actually denying it, you are denying the history the existence of people like myself, because this did happen. This is a reality, a part of this country. And I think we need to teach a truer history of actually what happened, not a less true history of what happened. And by denying it, we teach a less true history of America.
You have a question?
With your mother being a living witness of the race riots from 1908 and on, and still 100 years later, having similar things happen, what was her initial response, thoughts, feelings about, you know, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and the police brutality that was happening today? What was her response to that?
Yeah, immediately identified with what was happening, could immediately relate contemporary experience to what she went through. Still with an attitude of hope that there's a better way for us to relate to one another, and refusing to submit herself personally to anger and fear, but also acknowledging and committing to the fact that it's something that she went through, that she will, it happened, but that she would never forget it. So that's that reference, that acknowledgement. This is part of who we are. This is part of where we've come from, and we need to understand it and to continue to honor that, and know that that's part of our living struggle.
Thank you. And we have just a couple more minutes. Any other questions here? Yes.
I was surprised and I wondered about her face and her smile and the peace that's going through her face at this age. You know what? It's a great contrast to the trauma of history.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the journey back to Mississippi was one of the big processes in the movie. There are multiple processes that we went through in the movie, from trying to figure out how to tell the story to the point where we were trying to convince her to go back. And then once she went back, I could actually feel the release of energy. I mean, I spoke about the trauma piece earlier. You know, we know a lot more about trauma today than we did 100 years ago. We know now in international circles and with relief agencies that we have to treat that person's trauma, their psychic burden, their emotional turmoil that they've come from when they arriving from war-torn countries, etc. But that didn't happen for the millions of African Americans who left the Deep South, fleeing racial terrorism. It was like, just get on with your life, you know, which is much easier said than done. But I think the completion of that journey, especially at her age, she was 107 when she went back. The completion of that journey after 100 years, because she thought, you know, I'm done, I'm good, you know. It sort of elevated her, I think, even further, because it was like, there's some stuff there that I've been holding on for a century. A century. And now I'm done with it. So it was beautiful for her. It was equally beautiful for me, because I got to witness it and to help facilitate that.
The time is going so quickly, but I can't let you go without hearing some of my questions too. So one thing that comes up as one of the questions here prompted me to think about sort of the interconnectedness between the history and the moment we're in now. In the film, your mom talks about being miserable and hating to go to Buffalo, but at some point she started to love it, and then she was connected to people who were impacted by the shooting in the grocery store. Is that true?
Yeah.
Can you tell them a little bit about?
Yeah, so the shootings in Buffalo last year at the Tops Market they're the streets that I grew up on. It's the store that my mother went to shop at. It's the store that I would shop for her when I went back home. Yeah, it was really very emotional because I was driving in LA when I heard the story on NPR, and my first thought was, oh my God, somebody's going to call me, because Buffalo's that kind of community. It's less than 6 degrees of separation, and within 10 minutes I got a call from one of my sisters, who said that her friend's son was in the store shopping for a birthday cake, and he didn't make it out. And then my other sister called and said, I joke with the security guard every time I go to the store. And of course, he didn't make it out. And so you have this stretch of the black community in Buffalo that literally that is the only store within a radius of 5-6 miles. It's the only grocery store, unless you go to a corner store and buy a banana for $3. It's the only store. It is literally what is called a food desert. So anyone doing any amount of research on Buffalo on a Saturday afternoon, you could Google, where are black people shopping in Buffalo, New York on Saturday afternoon? Tops Market. Let's go to Tops Market. So I heard a early interview with the mayor of the city, who I know personally, and he made a comment that we don't really know the motivation of the shooting. We have to wait till a full investigation is done, and I was furious. I was really furious. Having grown up in that city, knowing that community like the back of my hand, it's like, you don't need the FBI to tell us what this is about. I mean, the guy had it written on the barrel of his gun. What more evidence do you need? This is where black people live, shop. There's nowhere else. I forget the question.
It was just kind of connecting you to your connection, kind of the 6 degrees of separation that connected you back to that.
So that's like 100+ years later now. So it's like, I mean, I think had she been there, it would have been just a fresh reminder of just how close the events of 1915 are to 2022 in a different form.
So deep breath before the last question. I mean, I want to stay here for another hour, but I'm aware of our 2:30 deadline coming up here. Maybe we'll do 2 in 1. So sort of what gives you hope in spite of this heaviness and the fact that the progress is so slow in some ways, and why is it important for you? You are our headliner. You're our first person to kick off Women's History Month. You're a man telling a woman's story. Why is it important to be allies to each other?
Yeah, well, on the first question with reference to hope, I think all the backlash and the anti-history laws, et cetera, is really depressing, but also uplifting, because it's like it's resistance tooth and nail, but it's impossible to resist. You can't bury this history. There's too much out there. And anyone who wants to know, and I think there are a lot of young kids who want to know, they're going to find out. They're going to learn, and they're going to pursue, different opportunities for engaging with each other and other communities in the world, because that's what it's going to take. It's not just a black struggle. There are multiple struggles, and we're all connected to it, particularly those who are doing any kind of social justice work or want to see healing and opportunity for everyone, people are going to find information. So that's positive for me. In terms of amplifying her story, you know, she's a simple, ordinary African-American woman who lived an extraordinary life. And I think there are so many people like that. You know, I think this is not the time we're going to see a whole lot of big heroes. We see a lot of really small heroes who are doing it every day in their communities, who are representing, who are telling the story, who are doing the work, who are on the ground. And she was one of those individuals. And there are many, many women in different communities doing the same thing. So I wanted to share her story and let people know that it is possible to get there.
Thank you for doing that for us today.
Yeah.
I want to tell you something before I wrap it up, because sometimes when I end, people want to beeline for the door. I want us to thank Tarabu with a round of applause, but before we do that, I'd like to ask, could we all take a picture with Tarabu, maybe?
Oh, that'd be great.
Okay, so first of all, let's give him a round of applause. And then we always talk about the beauty of breaking bread in community. Mamie also like to break bread, have coffee with people. Remember that today you can come to the Solidarity Supper at 5 o'clock and break bread with Tarabu and chat with him more. And right here at 6 o'clock, if friends or somebody else that you know missed this screening, invite them back so they can see